couple of minutes, people to join the audience. And this is also being live streamed. So we'll have a lot of audience on our live stream on Facebook and Twitter, X.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being
Hello,
here.
Sunita. Hi.
Can I just get started?
Yes, please.
Wonderful.
Yes, Sunita, get started. We are already live streaming.
Great. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Sunita Vishwanath, and I'm the founder and executive director of Hindus for Human Rights. It is my privilege to welcome you to this vital webinar, which coincides with a very dark day in Indian history, the 32nd anniversary of the day that Hindutva extremists destroyed a medieval mosque, the Babri Masjid. And this is also the 68th anniversary of the death of Dr. Ambedkar, the great human rights and Dalit rights activist and the architect of the Indian Constitution. Through this webinar, co organized by Indian American Muslim Council and Hindus for Human Rights, we are bringing together civil rights activists from around the world to shed light on the unrelenting harassment of Nadeem Khan of the Association for Protection of Civil Rights, APCR, and Mohammed Zubair of Alt News. This is not an isolated event, but a continuation of the systematic persecution that has marked the Modi regime since it came to power in 2014. The APCR has been a lifeline for victims of state brutality in India, particularly those from marginalized Muslim communities over the last few years. Under Nadeem's leadership, it has stood at the forefront, offering crucial legal support to the voiceless, whether in Haryana during the violence in Nuh or amidst the government led demolitions targeting minorities. APCR has been the first responder, documenting atrocities and fighting legal battles in the highest courts of the land. As co founder of Alt News, an Indian fact checking website of global renown, Mohammed Zubair has been a critical voice in debunking the flood of misinformation that threatens India's democracy. This has made him a target of the state's wrath. 2 years ago, Zubair was arrested on blatantly false charges, only to be freed after the intervention of India's Supreme Court. His case drew the attention of the United Nations. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, has recognized him as a victim of religious persecution. Today, he faces renewed harassment in Uttar Pradesh, whose rule by Modi's Hindu supremacist party is marked by virulent Islamophobia and systematic attacks on civil society and critics. We begin the discussion with the esteemed Prashant Bhushan, who is senior advocate of the Supreme Court of India, a towering figure in the fight for justice and human rights in India for decades. He has fearlessly confronted entrenched power, exposing corruption, defending civil liberties, and holding the state accountable. Time and time again, he has stood up to the government with unmatched courage, becoming a beacon of hope for those who believe in democracy and the rule of law. Welcome, Prashant Bhushan ji, who is joining us from New Delhi, India.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunita. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody, wherever you are. You have given a very fine introduction to Zubair as well as Nadeem. They are among the most proactive and the most fearless campaigners against the hate and assaults of various kinds on Muslims that are going on in India. India is today witnessing assaults on Muslims in various forms. It may be in the form of mob lynching, it could be in the form of fake encounters by the police organizations, particularly of states ruled by the BJP. It could be in the form of just hate, spewing hate, fake news against them to make them targets of hate. It could be in the form of discrimination from getting housing and thereby promoting ghettoization of the Muslims in the country. It is also in the form of the governments in BJP-ruled states bulldozing homes of Muslims after falsely accusing them of some crime. And it is now also in the form of trying to create communal violence by seeking to survey and examine mosques by making a claim that there was a Hindu temple several hundred years ago over which mosques have been built. So it's happening relentlessly, and the BJP governments and the BJP political leaders are all involved in this hate campaign against Muslims. And Zubair and Nadeem Khan are among the most prominent and the most fearless campaigners against this kind of hate campaign and systematic victimization of Muslims in India. And it's the sign of our times that far from incarcerating or registering FIRs or persecuting the people who are responsible and involved in these hate crimes, which are crimes under the Indian laws and under the Indian Penal Code, what we are seeing today is this ghastly spectacle of people who are fighting against this hate, people who are exposing this hate, people who are bringing this news to the world about the kind of hate campaign and victimization and persecution of Muslims that is going on in India, that those people who are exposing this hate are being accused in these FIRs, in the case of Zubair as well as Nadeem, of promoting hate. It's like somebody exposing a serial rapist or a serial murderer, and then somebody accusing him, ki, look, by exposing this serial rapist, you are exposing this serial rapist to hate and to violence by people who will naturally be angry at him for being exposed as a serial rapist or a serial murderer. And unfortunately, you see, the police who is doing all this, firstly, I mean, they are not registering cases against the real perpetrators of hate and violence, etc. And they are registering cases against people who are exposing these crimes. So, firstly, the police should be held accountable for this. Unfortunately, what we are seeing in India is that people get accused of all these, falsely accused, like Zubair and Nadeem Khan. They are often arrested. They often have to spend long periods in jail, just like our people from the Bhima Koregaon case or the Delhi riots cases, etc. That people spend years in jail, and at the end of that, of course, almost all of them get acquitted. But after having spent a considerable part of their lives in jail or facing prosecution, And yet these police officers who have foisted clearly false cases against them are hardly ever held accountable. They are never held accountable. And that is why this is going on with impunity. So the time has come for the judiciary, for the civil society to stand up, because you see, this hate is going to destroy the country. This kind of BJP campaign against Muslims is going to destroy the country. It's, of course, destroying the secular fabric of the country, but it will eventually, this fire will engulf everybody. So it's time for civil society to stand up. Unfortunately, our judiciary has also not taken a stand against this. The judiciary is supposed to be that institution which not only immediately takes action against these injustices, but also is supposed to take action against these kind of police officers who are, for malafide reasons or at the behest of their political masters, registering these false cases. So civil society needs to now come together. Political parties who are also at the receiving end of all this, the opposition political parties, but mainly civil society in India needs to come together to stand up and raise and have a large campaign on the ground against what is happening in India, and against the victimization of these people like Nadeem and Zubair. And I'm glad that people in the US are also trying to make a campaign against this hate and raising awareness about this. And I hope that this will soon become a large campaign, particularly in India, but across the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those insightful, powerful remarks, Prashantji. I should say that our panelists here are actually from US, UK, Australia. We're truly global. And just recently I saw on Karan Thapar's show, the lawyer, the very
Dushyant Dave
broke down in tears talking about exactly the things that you're talking about. So hopefully many people will rise up. We really, really need to. Our next speaker is Dr. Audrey Trushke, a distinguished historian and professor of South Asian Studies at Rutgers University, my alma mater. Dr. Trushke is renowned for her rigorous scholarship, which sheds light on India's complex history and challenges simplistic majoritarian narratives. Unfortunately, her academic integrity has made her a target of relentless harassment by the Indian government and its proxies, including members of the BJP and their vast army of internet trolls. Dr. Trushke has also faced baseless accusations, vile personal attacks, all manner of threats, including those directed at her family, including her little children. I and other colleagues have had the distinct honor of being sued alongside her by America's leading Hindutva organization, and the distinct thrill of winning that lawsuit. Yet she has remained resolute, continuing to speak out against injustice and defending the values of free inquiry and expression. Please welcome Dr. Trushke, Audrey, who is joining us from New Jersey.
Thank you so much, Sunita, for that very kind introduction. It is my honor to be here with you all, speaking to everyone today, and especially alongside my esteemed co-panelists. So being a historian, I'm going to do a little bit of historical contextualization, right? That sort of comes with the territory. And I just want to make quickly a couple of broader points that I hope help us contextualize why these attacks are happening, what the goal is for Hindu nationalists, and thus how we might best respond. So the first is to point out that Hindutva, or Hindu nationalism as a political ideology, is structurally anti-Muslim. Okay, so sort of anti-Muslim sentiment, it's not a bug, it's a feature. And in fact, it is one of the core defining features of Hindu nationalism. This is because Hindutva ideologues seek to remake Hindu identity itself. They don't want it to be a religious category. V.D. Savarkar, one of the major articulators of Hindutva ideology in the 20th century, was actually notably disdainful of religious Hindus. Some of his comments are honestly so anti-Hindu, I can't even really say them in class because it is too upsetting to folks. He wanted to remake, and Hindutva ideologues after him wanted to remake Hindu identity to be more of a sort of pseudo-racial, pseudo-ethnic, kind of like blood and soil kind of thing. If that sounds like European fascism, that's because it is. It's an Indian adaptation of it. And in a fascist ideology, you need an other. You need a hated, reviled other through which you create the self by defining what you are not. And Muslims serve that place within Hindu nationalist ideology. And so when we see targetings of Mohammed Zubair and Nadeem Khan, what we're seeing is them targeted as part of a representative class en route to creating this sort of vicious, exclusionary, highly politicized version of Hindu identity. Second point I'd like to make is that Hindu nationalists embrace violence as a virtue. And up until now, much of the targeting of these two individuals it's been reported a lot as harassment using that word. A lot of it is sort of formally nonviolent, but the threat of violence lurks very strong behind every threat, every lawsuit, every accusation here. We're seeing a massive surge in Hindu nationalist-led violence against Muslims, both as individuals, as communities, as well as spaces associated with Muslims, especially mosques and dargahs in India. And the goal, as I see it, is sort of twofold. One, there's generally a goal to silence a particular individual or destroy a specific mosque, right? That's sort of individual focus. But then there's this larger sense of sort of creating an example, and thereby demonstrating to Indian Muslims that they are second-class citizens, that they should not be expecting equal rights, and to encourage self-censorship and a sort of embrace of that kind of lower status in society. Third, final point I really want to make is that Hindu nationalists fear knowledge. They fear knowledge very, very deeply. That's why Sunita was able to list all of these attacks on me. Professors are among their least favorite people. I would say we come second after journalists, which of course dovetails with why we're seeing these attacks on these two individuals right now. In my mind, the main reason why Hindu nationalists fear knowledge is because they have absolutely no good arguments to make in favor of their ideology. Hindu nationalism is not historically grounded. It's not a historically Indian phenomenon. It's fundamentally a European adaptation that dates back about 100 years. So it doesn't have deep historical roots. It does not offer unity for current Indian citizens. It does not offer to preserve heritage and, even basic sites like the Taj Mahal that bring in an immense amount of money through tourist dollars for the Indian state. Instead, Hindu nationalists attack those sorts of things. Fundamentally, Hindu nationalists do not look to create a better society, right? They look to create a worse one. And so for folks who are able to bring out what that looks like on the ground through individual cases, they are especially threatening, right? And of course, then that means that those are the folks that we as the international community need to look at protecting first and foremost. I will end by saying the closest thing to sort of a prediction and a glimmer of hope that any legitimate historian can really offer here, which is to say that Hindu nationalism will not last forever. It will fall apart. Okay, all political ideologies fall apart, but fascist ones tend to wear themselves out a little bit more quickly than others because the hate has to accelerate always, right? It has to keep moving forward. You have to have more and more enemies. And eventually you run out of the folks you're allegedly giving privileges to and protecting, right? So it sort of tends to self-destruct at some point. But the promise, it's cold comfort to the extent that it's comfort at all, because the real question here is, as Hindu nationalism is accelerating and thus wearing itself out, how much damage will it do to Indians and Indian society on its way out the door? I do submit to you that the answer to that question is not written. It is not set, it is not preordained exactly how much damage Hindutva and its followers will do to India and her society. And it matters. It matters to fight back on a general level as well as in individual cases. Every small win is a chink in the armor, and they can help accelerate the eventual sure distinction of Hindu nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for your courage, for your clarity, and may you and your family stay safe. Our next speaker is John Sifton, who serves as Asia Advocacy Director at Human Rights Watch in Washington, D.C. We express deep gratitude to Human Rights Watch and John, of course, for this principled and prompt condemnation of the renewed harassment faced by Nadeem Khan and Zubair. In a statement released this week, Human Rights Watch wrote, and I quote, "The arrests and harassment of activists and journalists like Khan and Zubair are part of a broader pattern of suppressing critical voices under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. In 2022, Human Rights Watch had criticized Zubair's arrest over a satirical tweet and called it as part of the Modi government's pattern of targeting journalists and critics. And this year, the Human Rights Watch annual report on India emphasized escalating attacks on civil society, noting India's government uses discriminatory laws and technology to silence critics, including human rights defenders, journalists, and religious minorities. Please welcome John Sifton, who joins us from Washington.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be here with these esteemed panelists to discuss this important issue. I'm not going to talk about the root causes or the larger context politically, but rather just try to focus on some recommendations for tempering these increasing and continuing attacks on freedom of expression. When we speak of a broader pattern in India, obviously, we're referring to the many years in which the government has utilized vague and overbroad laws to criminalize free speech or dissent or criticism of the government or satire of the government. But there's also a broader pattern at work, which is that this type of activity is spreading around the world. And in some ways, India has been a model for other countries in seeking to misuse overbroad and vague laws to go after critics. And we've written reports about a number of countries through Southeast Asia and South Asia in which governments are misusing laws in very similar ways. And there is a copycat phenomenon there. In India, though, I have to emphasize that it really is hard to digest and hard to fully grasp the audacity, the absurdity, and the hypocrisy and the mean-spiritedness of these misuses and abuses of law to go after critics. Laws are meant to protect society, meant to protect people, and these laws that are ostensibly set for this purpose are being misused in a shockingly perverse way to criminalize dissent. And the audacity of accusing somebody who is attempting to combat and stop religiously based or ethnically based violence and turning them into the person who's perpetrating incitement, it's truly perverse. And that's why I say it, audacious, hypocritical, and mean-spirited. But the question is what to do about it. And I think that the recommendations about the need for civil society in India and the judiciary to stand up are spot on and absolutely correct. But as an international advocate based, working in Washington and work at the UN, Geneva, and around the world with my advocates,
John, you've frozen for me. Has he frozen for everyone? Yeah. If you can hear us, John, can you, are you back?
yeah, cut out for a second.
Great. Just keep going.
Our theory, sorry about that. Our theory, and it's not, a perfect plan, but our theory is that if Prime Minister Modi himself as a person is challenged and embarrassed on the world stage by media, by other leaders, by other legislators, about these misuses and abuses of law and about these incitements to violence, about the horrendous things he said on the campaign trail. If he is challenged, embarrassed, and otherwise exposed, and the party is exposed for things like this, these misuses of law, that it may have a tempering impact and lead to slightly fewer cases. It won't make it go away. It won't make them reform. They won't think again and change their ways, but it could temper some of the worst abuses. While, absolutely, civil society and the judiciary and society in general has to stand up in its own way and address this politically and legally in other ways. But I'm just speaking as an international advocate. We think that this effort to expose on the international stage is important. And what that means is going to other governments where Prime Minister Modi is visiting, summits, and more importantly, the media that covers his visits and the summits he attends. That's one of the things we've been targeting. And so I just want to flag a few things. Here in the US, Washington is about to have a new administration, which, as we know, has had a pretty friendly one-to-one relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. But Congress still, can exercise some pressure both on President Trump and on Prime Minister Modi and to the embassy and the Indian embassy by complaining about these things, and we will continue to urge them. In Brussels, it's also a challenge in this regard. But I want to point out two other things, which is one, this year, BRICS will be held in Brazil. And so we are expending a lot of advocacy to focus on the Brazilian government, both on the substance of the BRICS summit, but also on the visitors that the Brazilian government is welcoming, which include Prime Minister Modi. The G20 is being held in South Africa later this year, and that is also an opportunity, and we will be engaging with the South African government, both about the agenda of the summit itself, some of which dovetails with some issues that the Indian government is challenging in a good way, like climate change. But the fact of the matter is, some of the members of the G20 who will be visiting South Africa have highly problematic human rights records, and Prime Minister Modi is one of them, and the historic relationship between South Africa and India, does require the South African media and the international media to cover exactly who this person is and some of the abuses he's been involved in. So there's other ideas, but I just wanted to flag those because I think these are opportunities to alert media, academics in places like Brazil, South Africa, the US, and other places where Prime Minister Modi goes, and get media to cover his visits in a more critical way. We think that this could have a slight tempering impact on some of these really audacious and hypocritical attacks on free speech and the incitement that accompanies them. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for your remarks, John, and for the critical visionary work of Human Rights Watch. It is my privilege to introduce our next speaker, Safura Zargar, a steadfast advocate for justice who has faced relentless persecution for standing up to oppression. Safura was arrested in 2020 while 3 months pregnant under draconian anti-terror laws for her peaceful participation in anti-CAA protests. Her detention drew widespread international condemnation, with the UN, the American Bar Association, and leading human rights organizations demanding her release and decrying the gross misuse of law. Recognized for her courage, Safura has also been included by USERF as a victim of freedom of religion or belief, FORB, further underscoring the global significance of her case. Despite her release, Safura continues to be targeted. Her PhD admission at Jamia Millia Islamia was revoked in 2022 on the flimsy ground that she failed to submit her thesis within the stipulated time, even as other scholars were given extensions. Today, she will share insights into the crucial work of the APCR, Association of Protection of Civil Rights, an organization providing indispensable legal aid and documenting state-led atrocities against marginalized communities. Please welcome Safura Zargar.
Thank you so much, Sunita. It is wonderful to be here today, and thank you so much for your kind words of appreciation that mean so much to me. Um, to begin with, yes, I would like to thank all of you for putting this very timely webinar together. And I'll take this opportunity to talk about what is this targeting all about. To begin with, what is the job of democratic rights group? At the core, it is about protecting democratic, civil, human rights of the people. It is about exposing violations. All violations deserve critical attention, but what is chilling about these specific cases is the targeting of two people who are exposing these violations. The FIR against Nadeem Khan pertains to an exhibition that was put up in the Indian state of Hyderabad. This exhibition essentially highlighted democratic and civil rights violations in India in the past 10 years. It talked about lynchings of Indian Muslims on suspicion of cow slaughter, illegal demolition of properties of Muslims, enforced disappearance of Najib Ahmed, institutional murder of Rohit Vemula, the targeting of anti-CA activists all over the country, cases of custodial murders, hate speeches by far-right groups, and the government's inaction against all of this. Not just inaction, but impunity. Mohammed Zubair has been a target of the right-wing ecosystem since the time he started the critical work of fact-checking that his organization Alt News has been doing. The vitriol against him online is absolutely nauseating. Now, oftentimes we don't take it very seriously, but with time we have realized this. The online targeting has disastrous consequences, as we saw in the case of Sharjeel Imam, when a small part of his speech taken out of context was made viral on social media. Multiple FIRs were filed against him all over the country. This leads to a nightmare of prosecution after prosecution, multiple police custodies, jail time in multiple jails until bail can be secured, if at all. And we've also seen this in case of Rana Ayub. Now, Nadeem Khan is one of India's most distinguished, a morally upright and fearlessly brave individual. But what is unique about Nadeem is that he is a grassroots person through and through. In the last 4 years, as the General Secretary of APCR, Association for the Protection of Civil Rights, he has taken the work of APCR to new heights in terms of building an absolutely sustainable network on ground, getting together lawyers, grassroots activists, journalists to respond immediately and effectively to rights violations. He's always on the ground, putting himself on the line. Be it the communal violence in Khargon or Karoli, the infamous Ram Navami violence incidents all over the country, the lynchings of Junaid, Pehlu Khan Akhlaq, or the illegal extrajudicial demolition of properties. He has been to each of these sites. In the course of past 4 years, APCR has provided pro bono legal aid in over 1,500 cases, filed more than 1,000 bail applications for marginalized individuals, 400 plus complaints against police misconduct and hate crimes. More than 100 fact-finding missions were conducted and represented victims in at least 25 public interest litigation in the Indian courts. APCR's goal has been to provide not just pro bono legal aid, but legal aid that is effective and, most importantly, sustainable. We all are aware of the Siddiqui Kapan's case. When he finally got bail, he was asked to furnish bail bonds of 1 lakh Indian rupees along with 2 sureties from the state of Uttar Pradesh. But Kapan hails from the Indian state of Kerala. I have personally been witness to this whole scenario and the tireless efforts APCR made to arrange these sureties. APCR has made all possible efforts to advocate for the release of human rights defenders, be it the Delhi Rats conspiracy case, the Bhima Koregaon case, the Hathras conspiracy case, and so many other cases of political prisoners in the country. Before APCR, Nadeem has also founded United Against Hate in 2017, which launched a national helpline number for reporting lynchings. He is also the co-founder of the India-Palestine Friendship Forum, which came into being in 2018. And very recently, he's also instituted a think tank called the SPECT Foundation. All in all, Nadeem Khan and Zubair and Mohammed Zubair and organizations like APCR and Alt News need to be protected at any cost. I strongly urge all sane minds to ensure that this happens. Raise hell. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Safura. What a powerful voice you are for all the justice that we seek and the values we hold dear. We are so glad that you are safe and healthy. May you remain so and keep that loud voice and your flame of passion alive. This world needs it. Thank you, Safura.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Peter Friedrich, a well-known author and activist whose work critically examines the rise of far-right ideologies and their global implications. Peter has been a vocal critic of Hindutva, the far-right ideology driving much of the religious intolerance in India today, and is the author of several influential books, including Saffron America, which exposes the influence of Hindu nationalist organizations in the United States. Peter has faced significant targeting by the Indian media and disinformation networks. During the farmers' agitation in India, he was falsely accused by Indian outlets of being a mastermind behind an alleged toolkit to discredit the government, a baseless claim used to vilify dissent. Similarly, the Disinfo Lab, an infamous propaganda platform, has leveled false accusations against Peter, branding him as anti-India in a clear attempt to undermine his advocacy for justice and human rights. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Peter Friedrich.
At the outset, I stand in complete solidarity with Mohammed, Zubair, and Nadeem Khan. They have every right to do independent work, whether it is journalism or civil rights activism in the world's largest democracy. Over the past 10 years, the Modi regime has ramped up its suppression and oppression of every Indian voice of freedom. Zubair has already faced multiple retaliatory police charges for daring to exercise his rights to free speech, especially by exposing the hate speech of powerful figures in India. Khan is facing charges for daring to work against the injustice of the Indian state, extrajudicially bulldozing the homes of critics. Both of these men are stalwart examples of the reality of democracy. That is, that democracy does not merely mean pushing a button every few years to select a leader, but it is an ethos which must be lived out. Zubair and Khan deserve a place of honor alongside those many figures throughout India's independent history who have worked at risk of their own liberties and even lives to preserve the country's democratic ethos. They are an inspiration to us here in the West as we try to do our part to stand up and speak out against the ongoing onslaught on democracy in India. Yet, as we continue the struggle, this latest development is a time for us to pause and thoughtfully consider our roles going forward. As India has shifted from democracy to autocracy over the past decade, we are increasingly seeing the Hindutva project exported abroad. Not only has the Hindutva movement entrenched itself abroad so as to serve as a support base for the regime back in India, but it is beginning to also expand and set its designs on taking over the levers of power even here in the West. As we stand in solidarity with Zubair and Khan and everyone else who is struggling for a democratic India, those of us living abroad, even as our commitment to support their struggle remains rock solid, must assess the global ground realities as we formulate our strategies for the struggle ahead. India, despite its democratic credentials, has cut off access to almost everyone from the outside. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch cannot get in there. Journalists who tell the truth, like Australian Avani Das, are kicked out. Even UN officials are denied access. How then are we, from abroad, going to continue supporting those within India who are struggling for democracy? In the US, this is becoming a far more important question after Trump won the presidency last month. Under Trump, even as we work from the US to support Indian journalists and activists like Zubair and Khan, we must be prepared for the strong possibility that we ourselves may soon be faced with the BJP-style autocratic tactics being used to target Modi critics back in India. Although none of it occurred with complicity of the presidency in the past, we have already seen hints of this over the past 4 years of the Biden administration. We saw how RAW, India's external intelligence agency, conducted a systematic disinformation campaign against Western journalists, activists, academics, civil society groups, and even US governmental bodies. We saw a lawsuit filed against some of the leading US critics of Modi. We've seen how Aruna Miller, the lieutenant governor of Maryland, rose to power by stalking, harassing, and intimidating anyone who questioned her Hindutva ties. We've seen how the Modi regime brazenly conducted targeted assassination plots in North America. Now, however, we're seeing something entirely new with Trump's new era. We're seeing him stack the highest, most sensitive positions in his administration with cronies of the Modi regime. Vivek Ramaswamy, who has praised Modi's governance style and fundraised for American Hindutva groups, is in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency. Kash Patel, who supports the mob demolition of the Babri Mosque, the 32nd anniversary of which is today, and the Ram Mandir, which was built on the ruins of that mosque, is now tapped to head the FBI. And Tulsi Gabbard, who owes her entire political career to the Hindutva movement, is tapped as Director of National Intelligence. As the suppression and oppression of democratic voices in India mushrooms, the next 4 years for those of us in the US who support a democratic India promise to also grow tougher. First, as we have constantly attempted to get the US Congress to pay attention to the situation in India, to get the US State Department to follow recommendations to declare India as a country of particular concern, and to get the US President to stop platforming and embracing Modi, we will now be faced with a new administration which is stacked with people who not only adore Modi, but are also deeply linked to his Hindutva movement. Second, with people like Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard charged with top intelligence posts, and considering Kash's pledge to go after American journalists, as well as Trump's vindictive nature towards his own critics, we must be mindful of the growing risks even to the American resistance struggle against Hindutva. It is quite possible that we will no longer be fully guaranteed safety to operate under First Amendment protections in the US as critics even of what is to us a foreign government. We must therefore now begin to brainstorm as strategists and as tacticians, not only about how to continue combating autocracy in India, but also how to create an environment in which those of us living abroad can professionalize to work without fear of reprisal. As we stand in solidarity with Nadeem Khan and Mohammed Zubair and others, we must be willing to endure what it is they are enduring. Hindutva has gone global, and it demands a global coalition to fight it. From North America, those of us committed to the struggle will continue, despite the threats, not only for Indians like Zubair and Khan, but with inspiration from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for your insight, courage, and relentless advocacy. I don't know how somebody can be in so many places as you are. Just really hats off to you. Thank you, Peter. I'll take a moment to ask viewers to check out a new coalition that some of our organizations have come together to create. It's called Savera, which means a new dawn, and you can go to wearesavera.org. It is a coalition that is producing research and writing and advocacy on Hindutva, its presence in America and the diaspora, and its influence, harmful influence on democracy in America and beyond. So please check out Savera. Our next speaker is Anuradha Basin, managing editor of the Kashmir Times, one of Jammu and Kashmir's oldest English language newspapers. With over 3 decades of experience as a journalist and author, she has extensively covered the region's conflict, human rights issues, and border dynamics. In 2022, she authored A Dismantled State, The Untold Story of Kashmir After Article 370, offering an in-depth analysis of the region's political landscape following the revocation of its special status. Hassan has been a vocal advocate for press freedom, notably challenging the Indian government's communication blackout in Jammu and Kashmir in 2019. She filed a petition in the Supreme Court arguing that the internet shutdown severely hindered journalistic activities and violated freedom of expression. She has herself faced the wrath of Indian state. In 2020, the Kashmir Times office in Srinagar was sealed without prior notice. She has been a senior journalism fellow at Stanford University. Please join me in a warm welcome to Anuradha Bhasin.
Thank you, Sunita, and thank you to all the speakers before me who flagged very important concerns. On this day, I express my solidarity with Nadeem Khan and Mohammed Zubair, and also with the hundreds and thousands of human rights defenders, activists, academics, and journalists who have been targeted for doing their work by a Hindu majoritarian and authoritarian regime in India. Zubair has been charged of threatening the sovereignty of the nation. Why? Because he called out hate speech. Is the nation protected by hate speech? One cannot miss out the absurdity of this situation. While hate speech is being overlooked, even being rejoiced, criticizing it has become a crime. And this absurdity and irony, it plays out almost every day in today's India, where the rule of law has been turned on its head, and it operates in alignment with a political ideology called Hindutva, promoting a systemic pattern of targeting critics, activists, human rights defenders, and journalists for their work. The Muslims are particularly targeted. They are intimidated, put under surveillance, accused of economic violations, various crimes, and even terror charges. Many of them are languishing in jails for years. The extraordinarily slow judicial processes keep them imprisoned for years without trial, and India's legal justice system increasingly is now functioning as a tool of punishment through a so-called due process, where years of detention become the penalty itself. This is brutal beyond words. Young and bright student activists or young youth activists like Umar Khalid, Gulfisha Fatima, Khalid Saifi, Safura Zargar was in jail for some time. And these are people who are assets of the nation and can contribute productively. They are languishing in jails since 4 years, and their bail applications are not heard. The system is so brutal that the wheels of justice are jammed, making India a country that denies an 80-year-old Parkinson's patient Stan Swami a sipper in the jail, robbing him of health care his condition required, and letting him rot and die in jail. India is a country that keeps wheelchair-bound Professor G. Sai Baba in jail for 10 years and denied him medical treatment. Sai Baba was released in March. His health had so badly deteriorated in jail, where he developed several complications which were not treated in time. Consequently, he died 2 months ago. The crimes of all these people, defending human rights, injustices, opposing authoritarian regime and hate politics, and speaking for the marginalized. Not only are they targeted with criminal cases and jailed, they are systemically maligned and demonized through the manufacturing of a narrative that showcases them as enemies of the country and threat to the country's integrity. They're not a threat to the nation. They are a threat to the hate politics of the ruling regime in India. And the patterns of repression in many peripheral regions like the Northeast and Kashmir are even much worse. People in these regions have been vilified in the mainland narratives and othered for decades, much before this authoritarian regime took over. Their plight under this regime is unimaginable, especially in Kashmir, which is a Muslim majority region. And added to that has a difficult, complex, and contested history. A criminal case against Kashmir's human rights defender Khurram Parvez, who's jailed since November 2021 on terror charges, cites 2 reports published by his organization on human rights violations and patterns of impunity in Kashmir. This is shown as evidence of tarnishing India's image and promoting secessionism. Several journalists, lawyers, and activists have been arrested on similar charges, and many continue to be in jail. Many of them are slapped with multiple cases demonstrating a common legal tactic of a revolving door effect, making bail nearly impossible even when courts acknowledge weak evidence or procedural lapses. Even if the accused gets bail in one case, they remain imprisoned due to the other pending charges. And this effectively turns the principle of bail, not jail, on its head. Kashmir is the testing laboratory of this government. The repressive patterns were first employed there to instill an unending, all-pervasive fear, completely decimating civil society space and leaving few and feeble traces of journalism. It was done with ease, as Kashmiris were already vilified enough. And these methods are now being extended to the rest of India. There is a systemic attempt to silence journalists and activists, silence them, and keep them out of circulation so that no voices for the marginalized exist. They are kept out of circulation and silenced by terrorizing them, demonizing them, and exhausting them so that the important work that they are engaged in goes down the black hole. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha, for your remarks, and I hope and pray for a better day for Jammu Kashmir and for all of India. Thank you. Our next speaker is David Shoebridge, a distinguished Australian senator known for his unwavering commitment to justice, equality, and human rights. Representing the Greens in the Australian Senate, Senator Shoebridge has been a vocal advocate for marginalized communities both in Australia and globally. Senator Shoebridge has consistently raised concerns about human rights violations in India in his parliamentary speeches and public statements. He has highlighted issues such as the erosion of democratic freedoms, state-sponsored repression, and the targeting
I'm still on the call.
of minorities under the current Indian government.
It's going to go out.
As it is well past midnight in Australia right now,
Okay.
Senator Shoebridge has shared his taped remarks with us. Before we play his tape roll, I just request everybody to mute if they're not speaking. If you could play the David Shoebridge tape.
I'm David Shoebridge, an Australian Green Senator in the Federal Parliament and also my party's Justice spokesperson. I really want to thank the Hindus for Human Rights in the United States and our friends here in Australia too for bringing together this international discussion. And to speak truth to power, we know that activists and journalists like Nadeem and Mohammed Zubair have been imprisoned and persecuted by the BJP government simply for telling the truth, and often for speaking up against hate crimes that have been instigated against the Muslim minority in India. There are a string of cases like this that reflect a broader pattern of state machinery being used by the BJP administration to target their critics and journalists in particular. Amnesty International has said that India is an example of how the law has been used to harass, intimidate and persecute human rights defenders, activists, journalists, students, filmmakers, singers, actors and writers for simply exercising their peaceful right to the freedom of expression. We must, as a global community, speak out against these actions when we see them happening. We must urge our friends in India and our friends around the world to respect the rights of freedom of association, respect the rights of journalists, respect the rights of critics, to criticise power. This has never been more urgent than what we see in India. We have seen India slip down the global rankings year after year on any rating of journalistic freedom. And we know that democracy is challenged not just in India, but in many countries around the world. This is an incredibly important time to have this conference. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but you have my support, and I know the support of millions of Australians to speak up for global democracy, to ensure that we always speak out for the rights of journalists to critique power. And we stand behind our friends, particularly those from minority communities, when they are being challenged by the gross abuse of state power. Strength to you and strength to the global community in fighting against this.
That was Senator David Shoebridge of Australia. Our next speaker is Dr. Ritumbra Manavi, co-founder and executive director of The London Story, a Netherlands-based nonprofit dedicated to advancing human rights and democratic values. TLS has been at the forefront of engaging with the European Parliament and other European institutions, bringing critical attention to the erosion of democratic freedoms and rising authoritarianism in India. Through advocacy, research, and collaboration, the London Story has successfully highlighted these issues across Europe, emphasizing the global implications of democratic backsliding in India. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ritumbra Manavi.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sunita. And I'm really grateful and humbled to be actually speaking amongst the stalwarts on this panel. Both Zubair and Nadeem, they have a steadfast commitment to Indian democracy and core human rights, and that is not something that any of us, are unaware of. I am often in awe by the level of courage these men, but also women like Safura, who is speaking amongst us today, have shown in the recent times. And as a member of the diaspora, my commitment is more towards trying to see where we can, bridge the gap or do what we can in our own small ways to support what is already the Indian civil society doing to counter the Modi and the Hindutva politics in India. If I have to just recollect this whole, the Delhi police charging Nadeem Khan with promoting enmity and criminal conspiracy, citing a video in which he actually discussed victims of mob lynching and 2020 Delhi violence, while UP police under Mr. Yogi Adityanath, of course, charging Zubair for speaking against the hate speech of Yati Narsinganand, who is himself a known preacher of communal hate and division, as has been even charged and arrested by the police at several occasions for his communal hyperbolas. It just seems so surreal in the current democratic situation of this whole world, where the speakers of truth, the fact finders, the protectors of the liberty and the human rights defenders are being harassed and oppressed at every step by different populist governments. In Nadeem's case and in Zubair's case, the application of Section 152 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita by the state, accusing them of endangering the sovereignty and unity of India, it also goes on in some ways, in my opinion, to showcase the raw fear of opposition that Mr. Modi personally have. And the fact that these offenses are non-cognizable and non-bailable category offenses, it also reminds of the colonial era sedition laws, which were used by the colonial powers to oppress and cancel dissent and have no place for democracies to flourish at 100 years ago. And this also brings into the question the nature of the Indian democracy, which we know through the VDEM Institute, but also through the Economist Intelligence Unit's democracy index is a democracy in decline. In a democratic society, otherwise, the journalists and fact checkers are indispensable, and holding power to account and fostering informed public discourse is a necessary pillar of the democracy. But may I remind everyone with sadness, actually, that the World Press Freedom Index in 2024 ranked India 159th out of 180 countries, indicating significant challenges to press freedom, and this has, of course, not gone unnoticed around the world. In Europe, as Sunita already mentioned, we have been grateful to progressive leadership, political as well as the bureaucratic leadership, especially the parties like social and democratic parties and green parties, in putting human rights at the heart of EU-India relations. With some heroic efforts last year, former Green MEP Alvina Almatsa and the former SND MEP Pierre Larutru were able to introduce certain key documents in the European Parliament. This included a resolution in the mid-2023 on Manipur, and also a decision on the EU-India relations, which was introduced in Q4 of 2023, but it was passed by a majority vote in January 2024. What this resolution does is basically put human rights as the center rather than an annexure to the free trade negotiations with India. And this also in some ways provide us civil society actors, but also progressive diaspora actors to hold this legal document and say that, hey, because the parliament has already made this decision towards the commission and the council, so the council and the commission should respect this at least in their negotiations. So it does give us a good tool. But at the same time, I'm also very mindful of the fact that most of these allies from the previous parliament has now receded because of the rise of certain degree of populism in Europe itself. And we have recently gotten a new parliament. And also now we are in a process of having a new commission. And I hope that as we move forward from here, that old and new allies who have previously closely monitored the situations in India, held bilateral and trilateral dialogues, not just with the government of India, but also with the Indian civil society on these issues, will continue to do that and will continue to, stand in solidarity with our human rights defenders, journalists, and political dissenters in India. So that's from me. Thank you. Thanks again so much for having me today and to stand in solidarity with Zubair and Nadeem both.
Thank you, Ritumbra, for your insightful comments. And all of us in the States are really grateful to be able to partner with you so far away, making our movement so global. Our next speaker is Faisal Khan, a peace activist and national convener for Khudai Khidmatgar, a movement that carries forward the nonviolent interfaith legacy of Khan Badshah Khan or Frontier Gandhi. Faisal Bhai is also an advisory board member of Hindus for Human Rights. He was himself jailed a few years ago for the so-called crime of praying in a Hindu temple while being Muslim. Faisal Khan will speak now.
सभी को बहुत मैं शुक्रिया कहता हूँ इसमें मुझे यहाँ पे एज ए स्पीकर बुलाने के लिए। मैंने आपसे कहा था मैं हिंदी में ही अपनी बात रखूंगा और ये नदीम भाई और जुबैर की यहाँ पे जो हम लोग सॉलिडारिटी दिखाने के लिए आए हैं, एक अजीब सा काम हो रहा है इस समय देश में। जो लोग नफरत फैला रहे हैं और भारत के जो भारतीय मूल्य है, जो हमारी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल वैल्यूज है, उनको कमजोर कर रहे हैं, उनको तो आगे किया जा रहा है। और जो लोग इस देश को बचाने का काम कर रहे हैं, लोकतंत्र को बचाने का काम कर रहे हैं, हमारी ह्यूमैनिटेरियन और मानवीय मूल्यों को बचाने का काम कर रहे हैं, उनको ये सब झेलना पड़ रहा है। जो हम सब जानते हैं, जो इन लोग को, और जैसे शुरू में प्रशांत भूषण जी ने कहा था, ये केवल डराने की कोशिश है कि कुछ लोग जो बिना डरे हुए और बिना रुके हुए लगातार इस सब के खिलाफ खड़े हैं, जो नफरत फैलाई जा रही है। और लेकिन मैं साथ में ये जोड़ूंगा कि जिस तरह से इसका प्रोपोगेशन और इसको दिखाया जाता है मीडिया में, वो नफरत अवाम में अभी तक नहीं आई है। मैंने 40-50 दिन के करीब जेल में रह के देखा है कि अवाम के भीतर वो नफरत नहीं है, जो दिनों दिन मीडिया के जरिए, सबसे ज्यादा मीडिया के जरिए वो लोगों में भरने की कोशिश की जा रही है। उसको रोकने के लिए ये जो दोनों लोग लगे हैं, जिसपे दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट ने कहा कि एक एग्जीबिशन में कुछ दिखा देने भर से इस देश का लोकतंत्र कमजोर नहीं हो जाएगा। इस देश का लोकतंत्र इतना कमजोर नहीं है कि एक एग्जीबिशन में कुछ फोटोग्राफ दिखा देने से या कुछ चीजें दिखा देने से वो खत्म हो जाएगा या वो कमजोर हो जाएगा। हम सब जानते हैं ये चुप कराने की और डराने की कोशिश है और नफरत लोगों के दिलों में, खासतौर से मुसलमानों के प्रति नफरत भरने की कोशिश है। तो मुझे लगता है कि इसका इलाज मोहब्बत है। कुछ लोग मेरी इस बात से हो सकता है कि वो सहमत नहीं हो, लेकिन वो है ना, वो शेर है, वो मेरे चेहरे तक अपनी नफरतें लाया तो था, मैंने उसके हाथ चूमे और बेबस कर दिया। मैं अक्सर कहता हूँ, रोजाना ही कोई ना कोई यात्रा और कोई मीटिंग में जाना पड़ता है कि आप हमसे नफरत करो, लेकिन हम आपसे नफरत नहीं करते हैं और इस पर हम गर्व करते हैं। हम डरते नहीं हैं, लेकिन हम आपसे नफरत नहीं करते। ये हमारे बहादुर होने की अलामत है। तो इस सब का कानूनी इलाज जो है, जो लोग कर रहे हैं, वो हम सब जानते हैं जैसे हो रहा है, और उसमें मुझे मुझे उम्मीद है कि उसमें भी जीत मिलेगी। और मुझे ये भी लगता है कि ये नफरत नफरत की सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत होती है कि वो सस्टेनेबल नहीं होती है। उसको बार बार उसको बढ़ा, उसमें कुछ एनर्जी डालनी पड़ती है, उसको उसको आगे बढ़ाने के लिए कुछ करना पड़ता है, जो ये लोग करते हैं। एक मस्जिद के बाद दूसरी मस्जिद, अब एक दरगाह पे तक बात आ गई है। पिछले मुझे लगता है 820 साल से वहां से सिर्फ अजमेर शरीफ दरगाह, जहां से सिर्फ मोहब्बत की बात फैली है, जहां से सिर्फ मोहब्बत की आवाज लगी है, मोहब्बत की आवाज लगी है, लोगों के की भलाई की आवाज लगी है, वहां तक भी ये लोग पहुंच गए हैं। लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि किसी भी चीज की ज्यादती ही उसकी उसके खत्म होने का जरिया बनती है। अगर आप किसी भी चीज को लोगे, अ, उसको अगर आप उसको उसको बहुत ज्यादा करने लगोगे, तो फिर वही चीज आपको आपके खिलाफ जाती है। तो ये सिर्फ इसलिए है कि ये लोग, जो थोड़े से लोग मुझे लगता है बिना डरे हुए इस सब के खिलाफ खड़े हैं, उनको खामोश कर दिया जाए और उसके बाद ये अपनी मनमानी करे। तो मुझे लगता है कि ऐसे बहुत से ऐसे लोग हैं जो डरने वाले या खामोश होने वाले नहीं हैं। वो हम सब लड़ते रहेंगे, हम सब बोलते रहेंगे और हम सब मोहब्बत करते रहेंगे इस ये जो नफरत फैल रही है इसके खिलाफ। और फिर ऐसा होगा कि इनको अपने किए पे पछताना पड़ेगा, मुझे ऐसा लगता है। नफरत बहुत ज्यादा, मीडिया को देखो या सोशल मीडिया को देखो तो ऐसा लगता है कि कुछ बचा ही नहीं, अब हम बाहर कैसे निकलेंगे। लेकिन अभी बहुत बड़ी तादाद ऐसे लोगों की है जो इन सब मोहब्बत पे यकीन करते हैं, लेकिन वो खामोश हैं, या वो उनको ऐसा लगता है कि अभी अभी अगर हम बोलेंगे तो हमारे साथ भी कुछ गलत होगा। लेकिन वो हमारे साथ अपनी सॉलिडारिटी दिखाते हैं। तो हम सबको इस समय में एक रहना है और इनकी नफरत का मुकाबला हमारी जो सबसे बड़ी ताकत है मोहब्बत, उससे करना है। और हमारे ये साथी जो दोनों इस समय एक इन पे जो ये इन्होंने अटैक किया है, मुझे लगता है ये भी बाहर निकलेंगे, कानून के रास्ते से बाहर निकलेंगे। और मैं खुद भी, जब मुझे पुलिस वाले ले जा रहे थे यहाँ दिल्ली से मथुरा में ले जा रहे थे, तो वो मुझसे रास्ते में कह रहे थे कि हम जानते हैं कि तुम सच्चे इंसान हो या तुम लोग सच्चाई का काम कर रहे हो, लेकिन हमारी मजबूरी है। तो मैं वो और हम क्या करें, हम तो कानून के हाथों बंधे हुए हैं, लेकिन हम जानते हैं कि आप इस देश को के से मोहब्बत करने वाले हो। तो ऐसा नहीं है कि लोग जानते नहीं हैं। और एक वक्त आएगा, उसके लिए बस जरूरी है कि हम सब अपनी हिम्मत को ना हारे, अपना अपनी जो कोशिश है उसको ना कमजोर होने दें, और अपनी जो हमारी एकता है सिविल सोसाइटी की और हम सब की, उसको मजबूती के साथ और बढ़ाते रहें। तो ये जरूर खत्म होगा। और हमारा देश जिस जिस रास्ते पे कुछ साल पहले था या जैसा माहौल था, लड़ाई दंगा जब भी होता रहता था, लेकिन ये नफरत की फिजा नहीं थी, वो मुझे लगता है फिर से लौटेगी। और हम सब ऐसा दिन देखेंगे जिस दिन ये नफरत खत्म होगी। बहुत शुक्रिया।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया फैसल भाई. Faisal bhai, your words are like life-giving cool water that will put out the raging fires of hate.
थैंक
I'm
यू,
sure
थैंक
that will happen. Your voice always gives me that feeling of hope. Thank you so much.
यू।
I will now share my comments on behalf of Hindus for Human Rights. Hindus for Human Rights exists to ensure that there is always a Hindu voice speaking out against the persecution of political dissidents and minorities in India, including people like Nadeem Khan and Mohammed Zubair. Nadeem and Zubair are two of India's great truth tellers at a time when telling truths is dangerous. At Hindus for Human Rights, we are guided by the values of our religion, Shanti, Nyaya, Satya, peace, justice, and truth, which is why, as a Hindu, I cannot stay silent when people like Nadeem and Zubair have been harassed and denied justice for the simple job of telling the truth. Allegedly, Nadeem and Zubair's truths about the nature of persecution against Muslims in India and the way Hindutva actors fuel violence against Muslims are the real cause of disturbing India's peace. Of course, none of this is true, and none of the legal harassment either man has faced is a deliverance of justice. It is intimidation. It is a silencing of truth. Nadeem and I have had the honor and pleasure of meeting him and his family and close colleagues and comrades at his home in Delhi, has made a career out of fighting for justice, for civil rights in India. His organization, the APCR, has been the engine behind vital wins for Muslim civil rights, including the Indian Supreme Court's ruling to outlaw demolitions of homes or bulldozer justice. Nadeem was one of the principal organizers of the anti-CAA protests in 2019, and he has consistently fought against mob lynchings and other forms of brute violence against Muslims in India today. Zubair as well plays a vital role in combating hatred in Modi's India. At Alt News, he directs one of India's premier fact-checking operations, as we have heard many of our panelists talk. By simply telling the truth, he has been labeled as anti-national and a threat to peace in India today. I call for the release of these and the too many other brave human rights defenders and truth tellers that are unjustly incarcerated in India today. Umar Khalid, Sanjeev Bhatt, Khurram Parvez, and the many, many others. As a Hindu, I reject the hate project of the Hindutva regime and say loud and clear, not in my name. Our final speaker today will be the brilliant Safa Ahmed, my dear colleague, the Associate Media Director of the Indian American Muslim Council, the largest advocacy organization for Indian Muslims in the United States. In this role, she has been instrumental in addressing issues related to Hindu nationalism and human rights in India, speaking at events at the UN, at the US Congress, and across US universities. Recently, she appeared on Georgetown University's Bridge Initiative podcast, discussing Hindu nationalism's influence and Islamophobic narratives in the American context. Please welcome Safa Ahmed.
Thank you so much, Sunita, and thank you so much to all the speakers who have gone before me, who so brilliantly and beautifully spoke to the reality of the situation in India, as well as the need to stand in solidarity with all prisoners of conscience in India. And I will start by echoing all of what everyone has said before by saying that we at the Indian American Muslim Council stand in full solidarity with Nadeem Khan and Mohammed Zubair, two courageous Indian Muslim activists who are being punished because they amplify the voices of their communities and they refuse to let the hatred and propaganda of the Hindu supremacist government go unchallenged. The baseless criminal charges against these two activists are emblematic of a broader climate of anti-Muslim suppression and violence in India. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Bharatiya Janata Party, Muslims face daily violence, human rights violations, whether at the hands of law enforcement, politicians, or Hindu supremacist mobs. Muslims are publicly beaten, humiliated, and even killed for trivial or fabricated reasons. Their mosques are surrounded by mobs, chanting genocidal slogans and blasting hate-filled music. The deaths of their loved ones are mocked and celebrated by Hindu supremacists on social media, praying in public, posting online, buying or selling certain foods, running businesses in specific areas, having interfaith relationships, protesting injustice, or simply existing as a Muslim. All of this has been criminalized. Just a few days ago, police in Uttar Pradesh were caught on video pointing guns at Muslim voters, warning them that they had orders to shoot if these Muslim voters dared to enter the polling stations. And days later, at least 6 young Muslim men were shot and killed by police for peacefully protesting against a survey of a mosque in Sampal, Uttar Pradesh, demanded by Hindu supremacists in an attempt to claim the place of worship as a temple. So it only follows that Muslims who expose or challenge these day-to-day atrocities would also become targets of the state's ire. This is exactly what we see in the cases against Nadeem Khan and Mohammed Zubair. Being part of a human rights organization that raises awareness about these abuses can now lead to charges of promoting enmity by portraying a certain community as oppressed, when the oppression is the undeniable reality. A fact checker who calls out a Hindu supremacist monk, one who has been arrested before for inciting violence against minorities, is being framed as endangering India's sovereignty. These accusations are dangerous, overblown, and entirely false, designed to silence dissent and dismantle any resistance to the Modi government's Hindu supremacist project in India today. So as a diaspora, it is our moral duty to speak out against this systemic silencing of activists and journalists in India. We must call for the release of all individuals, regardless of religion, who have been detained for taking a stand against this suppression. But beyond that, we must also push the international community to take a stand against the Modi government's relentless assault as a whole on Indian democracy. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USIRF, has long called on the US government to act, including through targeted sanctions on individuals within the Modi government responsible for these human rights abuses. Now is the time for these recommendations to be heeded. The international community must prioritize religious freedom and human rights in its dealings with India, and global human rights organizations, we the people, must apply sustained pressure to hold the government accountable and to stand with those who have so bravely stood with justice for so long. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Safa, so much. Our solidarity across all of our organizations, across India, across America, across the world. We've had Australia, we've had Europe here. If we continue to stay united and in solidarity, that will be the most powerful resistance to the Hindutva hate project. And we will continue to stay united, and we will fight together for Nadeem Khan, for Mohammed Zubair, and for all those who are daring to speak out about the truth, who are languishing in jail, too many, fearlessly accepting those consequences. We will stay united, we will not give up, and we will see a brighter day. Thank you so much, everyone who joined us, and stay with us. Keep fighting.